to go along the lines of our bad dating advice, we're going to talk about 10 more pieces of bad marriage advice that we commonly hear.
Ooh, this is going to get more interesting.
We say that every time, dude. I'm so excited for this. And you're like, oh, this is going to get interesting.
But this one is true.
Everyone. We're actually excited for every episode.
That's true.
I find a lot of this
That's
stuff
true.
very exciting. And you are actually very interested in a lot of these topics. So
No, I know. We do this together, man.
I don't know why we're talking to each other as if we're not here right now, but that's okay. Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. My name is Pye.
I'm Dr. Glen.
This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years, starting with the one that you have with yourself, the relationship that is, and then working out to your relationships around you. Now, Glenn and I have started this platform not so long ago. If you are new to it, well, what we do is basically a research and academically driven approach to relationship therapy, but it is rooted in a model that we developed called core value focused therapy, where we can take everything from that science and academic approach from our own case studies and research and turn it into a practical model where we can help people without taking $50,000 in 5 years, which is the average duration that a couple would go to therapy for. So, anywho, today we're talking about specifically bad pieces of marriage advice. And these are also cliche pieces of marriage advice. So yeah, this comes from our research. This comes from personal experience. This comes from our case studies. And let's kick this off with number 1.
All right.
Communication is everything. The key to a successful marriage is communication.
Communication is important, but it's not everything.
Bullshit.
Why do you call bullshit on that?
No, what you said is actually accurate. Okay. But why do you feel like this is wrong though? Because you're right that communication is important, but
because it blankets what communication is. Because oftentimes people associate communication as verbal communication, but then there's nonverbal communication, the things that you do, the responsibilities that you do around the house, the gestures. All of that is communication too. So if you're basing it all on verbal communication, that's BS.
Yeah, I also feel like the piece of this that I really wanted to call BS on was the fact that when people say communication is key and communication is everything, first, being objectively a good communicator is something that's a lifelong pursuit. None of us go into our early relationships, none of us go into life as good communicators. I mean, a person that is a good communicator, that'd be like a professional negotiator, a professional, that is a person that has actually studied communication, that actually understands it from that standpoint. And you'd spend all that time doing it. So my whole thought is the vast majority of us are really craptastic at communicating. And if successful marriages hinged on this thing, we would all fail.
Well, the other thing too is people are actually pretty good at communicating their pain.
Sure.
Right. So like if you break it down in terms of communication and like, you're not giving me this and I want this, they're communicating pretty well about what you're hurting about and what you're not getting. So that communication is fine, but it's what you're communicating. Like you're not communicating what you really want. Like it's getting to the source of what it is that you really want.
Yeah. So communication is important, but by no means is it everything. You can't tell me that, well, we don't have sex, intimacy sucks, we don't really have much in common, I don't really have regard or respect for my partner, but we're good communicators. So yeah, we're in a successful marriage.
Our relationship is awesome.
Yeah, this is great. We're good. And on the flip side, in a lot of healthy relationships, you have one or both people that don't necessarily like to talk about their emotions and their feelings, and forcing them to. That is kind of the traditional model of therapy. Is oftentimes you're going to sit down and just talk, and a lot of us don't like to just sit down and talk. Doesn't mean your relationship is doomed to fail.
No, agreed. Or you have people that communicate pretty well, but then they're not talking about anything significant. So even though on a communication level, cool, like we're using I statements, we're doing this, nothing is getting accomplished. The pains, the work throughs, none of that is happening.
My daughter's very good at that.
How so?
She'll tell these stories, and the stories will last like 5 minutes. And at the end, none of us could follow or understand what. Granted, she is 9 years old, so there's a certain bar there that we're working on. But all of us in the family, there's 5 of us. Every time she starts storytelling, we're all just like, okay, what's happening? The little one will be like, wait, who's this? Who said what? It's really funny. But yes, you can say a lot of words and not really say anything at all.
No, agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Número 2. Forgive and forget.
Yeah, that's bullshit too.
You
want to, because you can't forget. Like, I mean, forgiveness means, it doesn't mean that you're letting them off the hook, but it is remembering the things that did happen to you and then learning from it and being able to move on. So to say that, we can just forget and act like it never happened, that's just complete BS.
Yeah, the better way of saying that would be forgive and move on, right? We're not going to weaponize past mistakes.
Agreed.
We're not going to go and throw things in our partner's faces.
Agreed.
But at the same time, it's this false expectation that you can forget something.
You're putting someone in a box. Like, okay, we've talked it out, so go act normal again, or whatever the perceived normal behaviors are. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And the way that this can often manifest is like, one person will have this repeated pattern of behavior that is very damaging, and the other person will forgive it, but then it happens again and again. And the person shows frustration, like, this happens again, and this is something we've been working on for a long while. Well, you should have remembered all those things. You should have forgotten those. That's what it means to forgive and forget. So you should be treating this like it never happened before. I'm paraphrasing what actually is, so we don't give away any sensitive stuff. But this often happens, and you have to realize that when there's a repeated problem that keeps coming up, that in and of itself is going to prevent you from forgetting and from moving on and from forgiving, because it's still there. Second, when we do forgive, you don't necessarily forget the other. If your husband or wife cheated on you, you're not going to forget it. That's impossible. But you can forgive, and you can move on to a healthier place for sure.
No, agreed. And falling within that similar line, there was a couple where like infidelity happened on multiple occasions. And then the partner is saying, why can't you forget?
Yeah.
Why can't you act normal in front of the kids? Why can't you just enjoy Christmas? You're placing an expectation, but beyond that, this person is wounded. They can't act normal in those circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just an unreasonable expectation. But they're forgive and forget. You should forget by now.
Yeah. We have to realize that forgiveness, that's not for the other person. That's for us. And we forgive because holding on to that resentment is as toxic as, actually taking small amounts of arsenic every day. Like it is literally a toxic thing for our minds, for our bodies, everything. We forgive for ourselves, and we can move on in the relationship, and we can get back to a healthy place. But to think that you'll forget is unrealistic.
It's dismissive, it's dishonest, and you're trying to force everyone into this emotional box.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
that's not healthy.
Forgive and move forward.
Forgive and move forward.
Okay. Number 3, always put your partner first.
No, that's not true. I mean, you want to prioritize the relationship. Prioritize the relationship. Work on yourself, but you don't always put your partner first.
If you're listening to this, I've just got this cockeyed stare going straight forward that I find these things so incredibly insane.
Because it falls in line with the whole happy wife, happy life.
Yeah,
right?
This whole philosophy is just, what's funny is that we think that there is an importance to serving others and to being there for your partner and your spouse and for other people in general. But somewhere along the way, we are taught, or maybe we just learn intrinsically, that we need to put everyone before ourselves. And it's impossible. And it's so strangely impossible because none of the people that we study and admire do this.
No, agreed. I mean, I think it comes from culture, the movies, because they romanticize like the ultimate sacrifice is sacrificing yourself for the love of your life.
Well, and religiously, you're taught this, be in service of others, and it's true, like be in service of others. But how did the message get to the place where we believe that you're to be in service of others before yourself? Because what I mean is, in every practical example, we said religious. So look at any religious leader, right? You look at Jesus Christ, for example. Well, didn't he create his relationship with God, and didn't he take care of his own spirituality before going around and preaching to other people?
No, agreed. It's an internal process.
Yeah.
Like this whole process of putting your partner first, it means that someone else can complete you and they can't.
And when you look up to a business person, you look up to Elon Musk or to, Steve Jobs or whoever these business people are, and you admire their business achievements and accomplishments. And maybe at some point they turn around and they teach and they help others, but they do so from a place of having already done that thing. And you look at even more practical examples where you get on a plane and they tell you, in case of emergency, put your own mask on first, even if you have children, put your own on first. And the thought behind all of this is that you can't help anyone when you're not in a position to do so. And you most certainly can't help someone when you're dead.
But I think people confuse this advice. Like when you say always put your partner first, like, that's inherently wrong. Like that's not what it is. But you do prioritize the relationship or
For
the
sure.
marriage. Yeah. That's a distinction.
But that's the problem in every piece of cliche advice, is that the advice itself oftentimes is just straight wrong, and other times it just doesn't include enough nuance. Like forgive and forget is straight wrong. It's forgive and move forward.
Agreed.
But in this case, always put your partner first. That's also wrong, but it's also losing nuance. So in reality, it should be something that's not going to sound as great. Prioritize your own needs. Then take care of those you love. I get it. It doesn't sound as great. It's not as easy to remember, but it's far more accurate.
No, I agree with that. You have to take care of yourself and then you prioritize the marriage or relationship at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not as sexy though.
No. Putting your partner first, that will lead. You might be able to do it for a time, but 5 years, 10 years, 1 year, it doesn't matter how long you make it. Eventually, there will be a point of failure where you've ignored your own needs for so long that.
And resentment comes into play and all of that.
Okay. Oh, I hate this one. Number 4, children will save your marriage. Can I tell you something?
Please.
Not only does this come from our case studies and clients, but this is one that I've personally gotten. An ecclesiastical leader and kind of marriage guidance person told me that having children would save our marriage. And I believed it. And we did. My children were the best things that my ex and I had ever done. But they did not save the marriage.
That's just bad advice, man. But you hear it all the time. Like family members will say it, friends. I think it's well-intentioned, but for the most part, it's just terrible advice.
It's such a whacked out piece of advice that I can't even understand the premise for this. What having children did do was that it made me so busy for a few years until the kids were not trying to kill themselves every day. It made me so busy that I didn't notice. I didn't pay attention. Well, I noticed. I just didn't have time to pay attention really to it or to worry about it. But then as soon as I did have time again, all the same problems were there. All the same issues were there and nothing was resolved. And now we had children in the mix to try and figure out, well, how do we do this now?
But that proves the point. Like at its best, this advice, it basically delays the marital problems.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just busy. And then so you're not fighting as much. That's at its best.
Yeah. And what it can do is if you think of it saving your marriage in the context of, well, a lot of people have children and they can no longer financially afford to divorce. So they stay together unhappily until the children move out of the home. So if you think of it from the standpoint of it can keep the marriage together longer, maybe even save it in the sense that they don't divorce because they're too old to, worry about this, then I guess there would be some truth to that. The only problem is that I don't think that's what any of us would consider a marriage. It would just be a unhappy family unit. And you would take all the trauma and the issues that you and your partner have, and you pass it down to those children.
Yeah, it's called a multi-generational transmission, right? So you're passing all those wounds onto your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then, even worse than that, like it's just toxic, infighting, awkward moments in the home. It's just not a good experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at its best, it could be a distraction, but in the end, it doesn't resolve or change anything.
Okay, number 5. Kids should always come first.
I don't have kids on this one, so I'm going to let you speak on that.
Insane. First of all, I got 4 kids. Do you know what their needs are? I mean, they will, these kids, and I love my children to death, but they will take and take and take and take, and there is no stop to the take. You can go and do a family activity, followed by another activity, followed by family dinner, followed by, and they're having a great time, and we are too. But they will do that until the point that they literally fall asleep, wherever you are. They won't ever stop and be like, Mom and Dad, do you guys need some time alone? Like, do you guys need, no. They will go until they just drop. So to prioritize your kids over everything, kids come first. That is another really bad expectation. And I get how people use this. This is used in a number of ways. Mm-hmm. We've heard this phrase used to justify why people shouldn't get divorced, right? You shouldn't get divorced because of the kids.
You got to put the kids first.
And then we go back to generational transmission. Like that's a really dumb thing. Because if you're in an unhealthy marriage, if the environment is toxic, then staying together simply for the kids is actually the worst thing for the kids, because they grew up learning and accepting that this is normal behavior, and they will take it on to their next relationships. So it's used that way, and it's, again, incorrect on that side. It's also used in the other place of your own personal needs, the couple's needs, the relationship needs, that those take a backseat to the kids. Of course, we're not going to go on date nights and stuff. We have children. We have, kids come first. But again, it's false. And in fact, if you were to say, how do I prioritize my home? It's my own emotional and physical needs, then my wife, then our children. And there are plenty of moments where, and I don't proclaim to be a, children expert, whatever this might be, parenting expert and whatnot. And I think most of the time when I do hear people say that they're parenting experts, I find their advice to be very non-pragmatic. Mm-hmm. But there are plenty of moments where I have said to my kids, Mom and I need some time. You guys go do some reading. It's time for you guys to have some alone time. We need our alone time. And that to me is perfectly healthy. In fact, I find it dangerous when I see couples, and we do have a lot of case studies where you actually see parents give everything to their children. And what is that setting them up for? When the kids don't know how to be alone, when they don't know how to do things on their own, when they're always used to this family unit being together, and they grow up with that until the time that they are 18, 19, 20, you set up an expectation that is so far from reality.
So how would you rephrase this statement then? Let me ask you.
Sorry, that was a long.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the insight. How would you rephrase that? Because I think some of the listeners would be like, oh my God, you're just not putting the kids first. I think that's all that they're hearing.
Well, I think it would be kids come first after you and your partner's needs.
Okay, so you got to take care of yourself first. Mm-hmm. Make sure your partner is okay, and then it's about the kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be safe to say.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I don't have it, so
at least safer to say. I can't say that it's always.
Like, it's not selfish to be selfful. Like, take care of yourself, because if you can't, then you can't take care of your kids.
Have you ever? I know we have clients that will probably say stuff like this, but just speaking from me and Yen, right? We will always do this to each other, where I'll come home and I'll see her and she's in a really happy mood, and I'll go, "You went on your run today, didn't you?" And she goes, "Yeah, it was amazing." I go, "Yeah, I can tell," right? And when I go to jiu-jitsu at night and I get home and the next day, she knows. She doesn't have to. She could be away from the house. She can come back and go, "How's jiu-jitsu?" She doesn't know that I went, but she knows from my mood. Oh, it was fantastic. Like, man, I just needed to choke those people out, and I feel so much better. And yeah, I got destroyed too, but I feel good.
But when I look at you guys in the house, when I come over, your kids are the priority, though.
They are.
They are the priority, and then within the pockets of making them the priority, you have these moments of just taking care of yourself.
Of course.
Right. So it seems to me the order is still the kids first, and then you're prioritizing around that still, it seems like.
I think kids first and always first would be me skipping jujitsu because
That's like self-care.
I just want to,
Yeah.
I want to be there every night reading and doing, and I do that. I do those things. But when it comes to the self-care, I don't skip on those things. And I don't feel guilty about it either, because it's those pieces of self-care. It's putting myself first for these moments that allows me to be there for them. It's putting on my own face mask before I put theirs on.
No, it totally makes sense.
And I'm talking about the airplane analogy, putting your own mask on. Everyone's like, face mask? What? Are you going into battle? Number 6, never go to bed angry.
Yeah, this is a horrible one, man.
I believe this one for a very long time.
Yeah. Talk on it. Speak on it.
No, you talk about it.
I mean, one, I think we talked about this before. Like, if you have to go to work the next day or you have things to do, and then if you try to never go to bed angry, you're going to waste hours and hours and then not be able to sleep. And then you're going to wake up more irritable the next day, then come back, not do your job well, and then still be arguing and still it just leads to this cycle of trying to accomplish something that a lot of times it can't be done, or just convenience wise, it's not feasible to do.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you do go to bed angry. It's like, yeah, we didn't resolve this, but let's get some sleep. Let's kind of take a break from it, and we can revisit it tomorrow.
I think it's important to say just that. We didn't resolve this, but we will tomorrow or the next day. We'll get to it. But let's take a break.
It's not the be all end all, because if you never go to bed angry, that means that it's so important. Like, our relationship is on the line at this very moment that it can end. That's why we have to not go to bed angry. That's like you're placing too much importance on that conversation.
For sure.
Right? Which means that it's not stable in the first place.
Yeah. In a lifetime, maybe there should be one of those conversations where we're going to stay up and hash it out. But it's just not realistic. I mean, the other side of this too is not only, like you mentioned, the practical responsibilities of the next day and everything, and just frankly trying to resolve conflict when you're already emotionally exhausted and tired. And that's not a good idea either. You're in a state of halt, right? We say don't address major issues in a state of halt.
Yeah.
That's hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Wait. But the other side of this too is, how long do we expect our marriages to last?
Forever.
Forever, right?
Yeah.
So what is the likelihood of these, however many thousands of nights that we don't go to bed angry? So what ends up happening is, and this happens a lot I find people that are highly religious, because this is touted so much in church and religious environments, never go to bed angry, that when it does happen, and it will, they will doubt the entire relationship. Even if it's a healthy relationship, they'll doubt it all because they went to bed angry.
Oh, this is a terrible sign. Actually, it's okay. Like, your relationship will survive it. And then most times, if you wait, you actually calm down, you feel better, right? You have more objectivity, so you can actually revisit it in a healthier space.
Yeah, in many cases, we're helping people to resolve problems that they have made worse because they stayed up late to argue about it.
And then this is my personal philosophy. Like, if you're so hung up, like you're so angry, and then like, man, I have to talk about it now. That means I got to sit down with myself and I have to dissect what's going on with me first. And then I can revisit talking with my partner at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That means that I have stuff to work on, because if it feels like it's that important, there's probably a wound that I need to address.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. You know who has the hardest time with this is, so if we brought a little bit of the academic side into this, when you have an anxious attachment, when you are constantly fearful of a relationship ending, when you are the person that's kind of the people pleaser, the one that's kind of going out and making sure that everything's okay, it's really hard to sit with the idea of going to bed angry, because you're always in fear of the relationship ending. If I go to bed, it's not going to work. If I do this, it's, we can't. And that's exactly the point that you're making, is that unease is not a sign of health. It's a sign of trauma. You have past attachment issues and issues that are making you feel as though it's not okay just to simply sleep on something.
Oh, agreed. And then on the flip side, if you're the avoidant attachment style, like if you're constantly like, you have to feel like you unload your anger on your partner all the time, that's not good either. Like, you need to have some you have to have some discipline and then control that this is not appropriate to do.
Yeah. Okay. Number 7, do what you did when you first started dating. This is usually used in context of trying to
rebuild the relationship and the passion, which is
terrible
relationship.
What did you and Ucky do when you first started dating?
Went out a lot, went to different places. We spent a lot, it was just exciting. We just did a lot of things together. But then as we get older, we have responsibilities. We have work to do. We have, her family, my family. So it's just the whole dynamic has changed. So if we were to go back and do what we're doing when we're dating, nothing would get done. Nothing would get done, right? So it's just.
But you guys still go out though. You guys still, a lot of times I call you, you guys are out and having a dinner together and doing stuff.
No, we definitely prioritize our marriage, but it's not like when we first dated. When we first dated, we're just getting to know each other. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to figure out if this is something that we're going to do. We're married now and we have responsibilities. So there's no way we can go back.
Yeah.
And then tell me about yourself. Well, we've already talked a lot about these things. Well, how are we going to go back and redo this again?
Yeah.
And then even like in sessions, like one of the, yesterday, that couple, they were like, how come you don't talk to me like when we first started dating? And he was like, because we're not. It's 20 years now. Things have changed, right? So to try to go back to the way that it was is just ridiculous. It's building sustainability and making sure that you have the long-term components to have a healthy relationship and working off of that.
Yen said something funny the other day. She goes, this wasn't the other day, this was like probably a year or so ago. She goes, I noticed we don't really text each other. This was during the pandemic. I noticed we don't really text each other anymore like we used to. And I go, that's because now we work right next to each other, so I can just say, hey, what's up?
Yeah, you're like right in front of me.
You're hot. I love you. She's like, yeah, you do that a lot. I'm like, there you go.
Yeah.
End of conversation. But now that, we're back to the workplace, I do actually text her more often again. So it's important to kind of understand the situational context of where you're at in the relationship. Like you just said, like at the beginning, some of the things are because you don't live together. So you text more, you call more. Mm-hmm. Now you live together. So you talk in person. It's not because you're not any closer. And when we go, or not because you're not close anymore. When we go to something like this, do what you did when you first started dating. What we're talking about is how do you bring back what we call risk, right? In the context of our framework, a piece of desire is risk. It's this unknown, it's this adventure piece that brings passion. So how do you bring risk back? It's not going back and doing what you did. If you wanted a one-line piece of advice, it'd be do what you've never done before.
Exactly. That's the change and growth component.
Yeah.
You're growing, the relationship is always growing, and it's building that risk and excitement together, sustaining this long-term relationship.
Yeah.
Which is still exciting. That's like an awesome thing to do.
You know what's fun about risk? We fall into these routines, which is the opposite, right? And then we get to a place where it's not exciting, it's not passionate stuff anymore, and we say things like, "Go to a restaurant you never tried and order something that might be whacked." And the first thought someone like my dad would say would, "What if it's not good?" And I go, "That's great, because if it's not good, you have something to talk about, right?" And what we try to bring to people's attention is how many of your fond memories are from these moments where things didn't go like you expected. They're from moments that were just crazy and chaotic. And when you look back, you're like, man, remember that family adventure where we had one where my son and I, we were in a kayak and we dropped the kids off with Yen, the two other kids, our middle kids. We dropped them off with Yen at this little island that we all kayaked out to. And then my oldest son and I, we took the boat out to the middle of this thing, and this otter, it was so cute. It was on this little rock perched up there. And so we started to kind of like get closer, and then all of a sudden the tide pulled us way closer than we wanted to go. I think it wasn't an otter, it was a sea lion, not an otter.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, bud, we gotta start moving back, because sea lions aren't nice when you get too close. And the tide kept pulling us closer and closer to this rock until this sea lion is just freaking out, screaming like, "Oh!" And my son and I are just frantically paddling to get away from this thing, because we're like 3 feet away from it now, and it could jump at us at any time. And we do get away, and we get past that little tide pulling us in. But when we think back on these trips, it's those moments. It's those moments where things didn't go as expected, where there was risk and there was adventure and there was excitement. That's what you think on most fondly. And when we fall into these routine and these patterns and we do the same things over and over, well, doesn't matter if we're taking time to be with each other, we're not creating risk and we fall into this boredom. So the solution here, if you want to bring back passion and excitement, is not do what you did before, it's do things you've never done before.
Yeah, move forward. Yeah, you can't go back to who you were, but you can become a better version now.
Okay, so what about number 8? The secret to a happy marriage is compromise. Compromise is such a shitty thing.
Okay, compromise.
When you think about it,
Okay.
I mean, isn't compromise just two people not getting what they want?
I mean, I think compromise is middle ground though, right?
I mean, it can be, but like in a business deal, the goal isn't necessarily to compromise. It's to set it up where both people get what they want. Both people, it's a win-win. You know, it's
a beneficial thing for both people.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Okay. You know what? As we're kind of going through this, I feel like the cultural mental filters, like I'm going through them too, as we go through them right now.
Which, like for example,
like compromise. Okay, compromise isn't bad, but then when you explain it that way, I'll be like, no, you're right. A relationship shouldn't be a compromise. It should be two people really happy. But then in my mind, like, okay, yeah, that isn't a compromise.
Compromise is literally in business, in sales, in any situation, it's both people not getting what they want. Like meeting in this middle ground where I'm going to give up what I want and you're going to give up what I want. And maybe there's enough left over.
Okay, so what's a better word?
Compromise. Let's see. Well, that's a tough one.
Because sometimes you have to make concessions. I don't even like concessions, right? But you have to make some form of an agreement, or there has to be something in place.
What would be an example of a compromise from, like, say, our case studies or clients? Give me an example.
Okay, like I would say a person that wants to do like a self-growth activity and then the other person doesn't want to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not a good example.
I mean, that's a fine example. Let's say one person wants to do something, the other person doesn't. So,
but then
what would the compromise be there?
So maybe the person that wants to go hiking because they're really into that, but the other person doesn't, but then they do it for them because they want to spend time together with them.
Okay, so the one person gains resentment because that's not what they wanted to do, but they do it anyway?
Well, that could be like a change in growth and risk thing, right? But then there's a compromise there that, okay, I'll try it with you.
See, to me, that sets it up for, so it either becomes this tit for tat game where like, okay, I did this thing for you and I went on that hike for you. Now you got to do this thing for me, right? And it becomes this, this game of I'm going to do this for you, you're going to do this for me, this trade back and forth. Where in reality, to me, the solution would be, look, hiking's not your favorite thing, but you do love photography. What if, come on this hike with me and then let's take some cool pictures and you can show me some of the stuff and I want to actually learn a little bit too. And you turn it into an activity where it's basically a win-win, right?
So you're describing more like emotional things and quality of life. To me, compromise is about responsibilities. Like you have to compromise on things that you don't want to do responsibility-wise.
Well, you gave the analogy of a hike, so I'm sticking with
that. I'm sorry. But I feel like compromise in terms of responsibilities, that is important.
Okay, give me another one of those.
Like, cleaning, setting up a cleaning schedule or basing it off of like, maybe this isn't your favorite thing to do, but we got to get this done. You don't like taking out the trash on Wednesdays after work or whatever the case may be, but you got to do it. You got to compromise to do it.
So, okay, along those lines, let's say that you and I are married and I really just hate taking the trash out. I don't enjoy doing it. So is it my job so what is the compromise there? In fact, I don't even like housework.
Okay. So then it maybe compromising is you do another activity other than taking out the trash. Maybe you vacuum.
I don't like that either. I don't cook. I don't clean. But I got you heard Cardi, bro.
Why did I get married now? But I think that to me, that's compromise though, is finding something that you would do, that you'll do consistently, and then I'll do something too. Like that's a compromise based on shared responsibilities.
Okay, so I would scratch the term compromise and I would replace the term counterbalanced effort, which is the piece of our framework on sustainability. That's counterbalanced effort. Because if I'm Cardi and I don't cook and I don't clean, your solution to this and our solution to this shouldn't be for me to compromise. Well, you do this thing that you don't like to do, and I'll do this thing. Because again, neither person is getting what they want. So if you and I are married and I say, I don't do housework, I don't do this stuff, the solution isn't, well, what if you did this on, Mondays and Wednesdays and I'll do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays? No, the solution is, well, how about this? What if then you work and we both pay half and half to someone to actually come and do the cleaning then? That would be not compromise. That would be creating a counterbalanced effort, right? I'm not actually compromising and giving up what I want. What I'm doing is doing something that I would rather do and then helping to get to the goal that we both have.
Yeah, and I think, when you're explaining it makes sense, but I think sometimes for the viewer standpoint, they sound like the same thing. And that's why these kind of sayings, that's why it can be really confusing at times.
It can be, because you could look at that and say, well, let's compromise and find a cleaner, right?
Right.
But I think the term compromise, in terms of the way that it's set up, the way it's implied, the way it's defined, the way it's used most often, is that I'm giving up something and you're giving up something and we meet in the middle. When in reality, I don't have to give up anything. I can choose to do more of something that I like, and you can choose to do more of something you like, and we can synergistically get the thing in the middle done.
That makes sense. So counterbalance, meaning that we're working together to still make something sustainable and healthy, versus compromise being you have to sacrifice something that you don't want to on both sides.
Correct. And another example of this, actually, housework is a great one, because we have plenty of case studies in this where the person that's at home will actually come and say, well, I just want them to do more chores around the house.
And then that becomes a counterbalance.
Yeah. Well, why do you want them to do more chores around the house? Because that person is actually going out, and it can be a man, woman, any pronoun you'd like. It could be anybody that's out working, right? That person is providing, and they're doing a tremendous job providing. The other person is taking care of the home, right? But the person that's at home is saying, you got to do some of the chores. You got to do some of these things. But the other person isn't saying, well, you got to do some of my job. You got to come to the office and do what I'm doing. And so that's, to me, what compromise does, is it pushes people into the mindset that, like, we both need to be doing an equal amount of the things that we don't like. And now it becomes a tit for tat game. And the real answer should be, no, this should be counterbalanced effort. This should be, I'm going to do the things that I'm good at. You're going to do the things that you're good at, and the things that we both want to do. And then we're going to find a solution for those things that we don't want to do. That doesn't involve you giving up you and me giving up me.
Yeah, you don't have to sacrifice who you are and what you like to make this happen.
Yes.
Right? Like even in that example that you just gave, the person like, hey, I'll be with the kids so you can go exercise and do your own thing for a while because you've been with the kids all day.
Yeah.
So it's just making the counterbalance so that everyone can win.
I forgot to mention at the beginning of this episode that we had a 11th bonus advice. That was going to be like our hook to get them to stay through. This is interesting enough. They should still be here. If you're still here, let us know.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for being here. Drop us a line on Instagram. Say, I was listening to this episode all the way through. I heard it all. Number 9, it's better to keep finances separate.
So they've done studies on this, right? It's actually good to have 3 bank accounts, right? You have a shared account and you have separate accounts. And then what you do on your separate accounts, like you just do it. You don't have to report it. But then you guys like share like the shared accounts, paying bills and all these other things, because it leaves some sense of independence and autonomy. Mm-hmm. So
this one's an interesting one because from that standpoint of like shared accounts, that primary account that they both share still allows them to have goals and values and what they're building towards. And the secondary accounts, from the way that I'm thinking, should be minor accounts. This is, small, what do you want to call them? What is that? Like little cash funds, right? This is your discretionary expense type, thing. They're not significant stockpiles of cash. in some cases, we see people secretly keeping bank accounts where they're actually pulling.
They're hiding it. Yeah.
They're hiding money and they're pulling money from their stuff and putting it in those accounts going, yeah, I just got to have this as a backup. Like my mom always told me, you got to have a separate account and you got to keep your finances separate. And those are significant accounts. And sometimes they're siphoning off. And that creates massive trust issues. And they're no longer going towards the same goal. And it becomes really problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So in this example, it's like really having separate accounts and that's it. Mm-hmm. And no one knows what they're doing with the money at all.
Yeah, the typical advice is it's better to keep finances completely separate. And I don't agree with that.
No, that's terrible advice.
Yeah, I think that you are not working towards a common goal. I think that you're unaware of what, I think financially it's just not smart that both of you remain unaware as to what the other person is doing.
No, agreed.
And I think that the 3-account system is the best way if you want to keep the...
There's some sense of autonomy, but
Correct.
You guys are sharing at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's a healthy balance.
Yeah. And with most of the assets being like
it's got to be transparent.
Yeah. Look, the way that sounds healthy to me, and you and I haven't, talked about this subject in depth before, but the way that sounds healthy to me is that if we want to give each other a $500 discretionary amount each month, right? Fine. That's we don't need to talk about all the dumb little things that we do. Mm-hmm. That to me is healthy. But that the majority of what we do and our money is still together. Our goals are still united and we're still that's healthy. But keeping 2 completely separate accounts, not healthy and not aligned. And doing the whole thing with secret accounts, well, that's obviously an issue too.
No, I agree. And that's what the 3 accounts means. You have a shared account, and then you have like a discretionary thing independently where you're like, yeah, just do what you want with that money. I'll do what I want.
Yeah.
But it's a shared experience overall. I'm with you.
Oh, okay.
I'm with you.
We're together on this.
I'm with you. But honestly, as I go through this, it's breaking the things that are in my head. Like the commercials in your head. Mm-hmm. 4 out of 5 people choose Tide, right? So as we're going through this, it's like breaking the things that I'm hearing in my head. Like my initial response is like, oh, that's nice. Right?
Yeah. I think I'm hoping a lot of people are reacting that way because it's a lot of the stuff that we're force fed that we've somehow adopted.
And it's just internalized. It's like unconscious. It's mentating.
Number 10, we have a bonus number 11. We're going to have to stick around for a second. Number 10, cheating means it's over. If they cheat, get out.
That's not always true either.
Not always true.
It's painful and it's hard and it requires a lot of work, but it doesn't always mean that it's over.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much underneath this. Esther Perel talks on this a lot.
Yeah, she's great on that.
She's really fantastic on this. But one of the lines she says is that contextually, what leads up to the affair is the responsibility of both people. The person making the decision to have an affair, that's not your responsibility. That's them. Right. But the kind of those playground, that playground of what leads to that place is both people's responsibility. And it comes down to understanding why they did what they did. Is this something that can be resolved? Is this a thing that the other person can get over? There's so many factors in here. Sometimes it truly is a mistake, and sometimes the other person can change their values and they can actually shift and adjust and understand. But, and I would say probably I don't know if we want to put a number on this, but I'd say the majority of times it doesn't work out. But it's not a sign that just because that happened doesn't mean you have to say you should always end the relationship.
No, I agree. And then you shouldn't take the other advice that's there, forgive and forget.
No,
right?
Yeah. Let's
again, start over again like it was the beginning.
Everybody cheats. Everyone has this issue. Infidelity is such a common thing. Like both sides of that is completely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's a painful, extremely painful experience, I'm sure. But it doesn't mean that it's over. You can still try to make it work. Yeah.
It's an interesting subject that I think would be fun to kind of dive into in a separate episode because there's a lot of pieces there that for the person that actually goes and makes that decision, a lot of questions like why would they choose that? What set of values basically brought them to avoid the problem altogether and to go and do this as opposed to address it in the marriage before, there's a lot of different things going on, but
and even on the other side, like why am I going to stay, or what's the line for me where like I just can't do this anymore? right? So it brings up really important conversations about the relationship.
Painful process. Those are the instances where, again, when we go back to ideas like marriages and relationships, there's that common advice that we gave about dating, that relationships should always be easy. And we said, no, there are moments where relationships are difficult. There are moments where they're easy, but they generally shouldn't be painful. That's a moment, infidelity is a moment where it's going to be painful. And, for a marriage to have to deal with this kind of stuff on occasion, deal with pain on occasion, okay, those are things that you can potentially work through. But if we're talking about you believe that pain is part of a successful marriage or that this is a normal thing, it's not. Pain should not be a normal part of a successful relationship.
Or like in that example, if it's repetitively happening.
That's what I mean.
If you over and over.
Repeatedly experience this pain, then
it's like, come on, man.
That's a very different thing. So anyway, it's important to actually look under the context of why. So can we get to number 11 though? Because this is the best one of all of them. And we should preface this one that this actually came from a doctor, right?
This came from a doctor. So number 11 is tantric sex. Tantric sex, man.
Wait, specifically it was screaming at each other.
So basically I had a friend and he went to go, he was married and he went to see a doctor. And then basically they were having they're just fighting a lot at home. And then the advice that this doctor gave them was fight it out and then escalate it to the point, because if you keep arguing, it's going to lead you to get in touch with your tantric sexual side. You guys are going to have a lot more sex and eventually the fighting will end. So instead of reducing the fighting, increase it, which will then lead to this tantric sexual experience of healing.
So scream at each other until you're having tantric sex.
Exactly. And then the sex itself will solve the problem.
He was a doctor of what?
So I think he was either a psychiatrist or psychologist.
And this goes back to some of our first episodes when we talked about how our own anecdotal advice gets mixed into therapy, despite the degrees that might be behind someone's name.
But tantric sex, man, that was the advice.
Well, that's not a cliche piece of advice, which is why we saved it for number 11. But it is a piece of advice that came from a doctor of psychology that we need to call BS on.
But then it was so funny because they were like, we tried it because we're like, okay, they're like, screw
it.
They
actually tried it?
Yeah, like they're like, okay, fuck it, like let's try it. And then they were like, we didn't want to have sex. Like we're just pissed, right? Like, right? So it was just like, this is the worst advice that they've ever received. They're like, this doesn't work. Like they just hated each other.
Yeah. If you can scream at somebody and be truly angry and dislike them and then have sex with them, that might be signaling some other things that are worth working on.
Yeah, so that I think out of all of them, this is like the worst one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for closing out this wonderful episode with
Let's just
number 11.
Man. Forgive and forget and have tantric sex, man.
Yeah.
Start over.
Fantastic. We hope you all have enjoyed the episode. If you did, well, there's a number of ways that you all can participate with us, starting with subscribing to the podcast. We'd love that if you guys dig it. It helps us a ton to jump onto iTunes and leave us a review. We appreciate positive 5-star reviews. If you have something negative to say, well, that's what Instagram and TikTok are for. You can hop on there and DM us your questions, your thoughts, your critique, whatever you got. And if you have questions, we don't do DM and advice over, we don't do advice and therapy over DM, but what we can do is kind of take your questions and bring them onto the podcast and the platform. Meantime, if you are looking for personal coaching or relationship coaching, you can jump onto 12weekrelationships.com where you can sign up for the waitlist. We have a little link for joining the waitlist, and we'll also include it in the description of the video if you're on YouTube. You can sign up on the waitlist to meet with Dr. Glen and to join our 12-week coaching program. That's it for us. We will have much more coming soon. See you guys later.
Thank you.